So the case that we are covering today is actually quite a recent case, and the evil perpetrator at the centre of today's case is a man named Daniel Callahan, and there is a special place waiting for him. Daniel Callahan was born on the 13th of September 1987, making him a Virgo, and he grew up in the state of Mississippi, where most of today's case takes place. And Daniel was the eldest of 3 half siblings. They all had the same mom, and let's just say their mom was not a good role model. Oh no. She has been described by Daniel's sister as, quote, a piece of... They also attended 12 different schools in 1 year. Yeah, you had that right. 12 different schools in 1 year. That is how much they moved around. Can you imagine the effect that would have on children? The instability is insane. And you might be thinking, okay, so where's Daniel's biological dad? Oh, well, where do we even start with Daniel's biological dad? Because he was possibly even worse than the mother. Because Daniel's dad was himself. Yeah, he was a... Daniel's dad was a man named Kelly Wayne Drott, and he completely went off the rails. He kidnapped an 18-year-old girl called Rebecca Forbes, and he beat her to... So at just 7 years old, Daniel knew all of the details about his dad's crime case. But just to take things one step further, Daniel's mom repeatedly told Daniel that one day he would turn out exactly like his father and become a... And I'm just so speechless right now. Why would you say that to your child? Like, why would you do that? He's only 7 years old and you're actually telling him that he's going to turn out like his dad and become a... And she would say this to him repeatedly. So Daniel and all of his siblings, they end up in the foster care system. And Daniel, once he was placed into care, this is where he would now remain for the rest of his childhood. So we now have to skip forward to when Daniel is an adult now. And this is when he starts to develop an extremely long criminal record. Which, were we expecting anything else? In 2006, when he was 19 years old, he was arrested for burglary and various other misdemeanors. In 2008, he was arrested for an assault on a family member. He was also charged with theft. And then alongside another family member, he was charged with aggravated battery for attacking somebody with a mason jar. In 2009, he was arrested for theft and burglary once again. He was also charged with unauthorized access to an automobile. He was then also arrested for stealing from his own mother, but she later dropped those charges. He then pled guilty to felony burglary, to which he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. In 2008, Daniel does something very unexpected because he gets married. It came out of nowhere. It was a very sudden decision. He got married to a woman called Amber Boyd, who was 1 year older than him. And this is just no surprise, is it? But he treated Amber appallingly. She also tried to file a restraining order against Daniel, but for some reason this motion was dropped. She really was trapped in this relationship. However, Amber did manage to escape the relationship because one time Daniel was arrested once again. And this time he was taken to jail, and in that time when he was away, she thankfully managed to escape. So now we get to 2010. Daniel is now divorced. He was out of jail and unsurprisingly, he was back committing various different burglaries. But this is when Daniel started to suffer a lot with his mental health. He started having lots of hallucinations. And it was also around this time that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So now we skip forward to 2021. Daniel is now in his 30s. He has been out of prison for about 2 years at this point, and he's currently homeless and he has no one to turn to. So this is when he does decide to reach out to a family member, which was his sister, a woman named Dixie. And Daniel hadn't really been in contact with his sister Dixie for the last 7 to 8 years. And that is because the last time he was in contact with his sister, Dixie had given Daniel a place to stay, but whilst he was staying there, he tried to convince Dixie's current boyfriend to cheat on her and hook up with other women. But Daniel now reaches out to Dixie once again, and it just so happened to be Christmas time. So Dixie felt very sorry for Daniel. So this is when Dixie allows Daniel to come and stay in a trailer that was on the grounds of her property. And it went okay at first, but it didn't take long for things to become extremely disturbing. Daniel dug a huge hole in like a forest area nearby. Daniel then started telling Dixie that that hole was for her boyfriend. And Daniel asked Dixie multiple times if he could her boyfriend. I'm not making this up. It's insane. But things just keep getting worse and worse from here. Because one night, it happened to be a very cold night. Daniel asked Dixie if he could sleep in her enclosed porch instead of the trailer. And Dixie said yes. However, during that night, something truly disturbing happened. Because in the middle of the night, Dixie started to hear crying. And she has described it as devastating crying. And she went to see what the sound was, and it was Daniel, but he was asleep. And it seemed like he was having a nightmare. He was jerking at the same time as crying. But Daniel, he just broke down and he said to his sister, quote, "Sissy, I messed up. I can't stop having these night terrors." But then not long after, Daniel broke down again and he actually confessed to Dixie why he was having these night terrors. He opened up to Dixie and he told her that he had somebody. But then a few days later, Dixie, her boyfriend and Daniel, they were all sitting around a bonfire and a song called On My Mind came on. And as soon as this song came on, Daniel kind of had a glazed look over his face. It almost looked like he was remembering something. And this is when he came out and said, "That is why John Estes got what he got." And Dixie was stunned. She was like, "Oh my God, is that the victim? Has Daniel now just given up the name of the victim? Was that a confession?" So Dixie made an excuse to leave the bonfire. She said she had a little bit of an upset stomach and she ran into her home. She now knew that her brother was a and she was determined to get the authorities to do something about it. And this is where today's case just makes me so angry. Because Dixie tried to do the right thing. She tried to turn her brother in, but no one took her seriously. So when she went to the police with all of the information that she had, they thought that she was just making the whole thing up. They told Dixie that she needed physical evidence. During this time as well, Dixie also reported that her brother Daniel had confessed to a minor, but she had no more information on this. So when she went to the sheriff's office with that information, an investigation was opened, but then it was quickly closed. And this is when Daniel started telling Dixie that he wanted to become exactly like his father. She tried to do the right thing. She tried to turn her brother in, but no one was listening to her. So she had to take things into her own hands. So Dixie kicked Daniel off of her property and she told him that she never wanted to see him again. So following this, Daniel is homeless once again. But then we get to 2024. This is when Daniel becomes close to a woman who is very significant to today's case. And that woman is called Victoria Cox. And things quickly go downhill from here. She was currently in her early 30s and she has 3 children. However, what we do know is that Daniel was planning to do something absolutely horrific and Victoria was going to join him. But then there is another woman and that is Callie Jo Brunette. All we know is that Daniel was currently living on the property and it is believed that Callie may have gotten angry with Daniel for whatever reason and she wanted him off of her property. But Daniel wasn't having it. He was getting more enraged as time went on. And by the time we get to June of 2024, Daniel is about to do the unthinkable. Because on the night of June 11th, 2024, going into June 12th, Daniel was present in the home of Callie in Louisiana, where Callie was living with her 2 daughters. And tragically, Daniel launched an unprovoked attack on Callie and ended up her 50 times. It was a long, drawn-out, brutal attack. And after this brutal attack, 35-year-old Callie Jo Brunette lost her life. But things are not over there, because after Callie, this is when Daniel kidnapped her 2 young daughters. He forced them both into their own mom's car and he drove off. He then drove the 2 girls about 2 hours north, crossing state lines from Louisiana into Mississippi, and he was driving back towards his hometown. But this is when he arrived at the home of Victoria Cox. Daniel arrives at Victoria's home and he literally goes up and tells her what he has done. And he asks Victoria for a place to stay, to which Victoria says yes. What the is she doing? She now becomes his co-conspirator. But things are about to get so much worse because Daniel now takes the 2 children inside of Victoria's home. And this is now when Daniel starts to assault the older of the 2 girls, 6-year-old JB. Daniel instructed Victoria to also assault the 6-year-old girl, to which Victoria agreed. So at this point we get to the next morning, and at this point Callie's parents had become very concerned that they couldn't reach their daughter. So Callie's parents raised the alarm to Erin's father. Can you go over to the house, check that everything is okay, because they trusted him. So Erin's father went over to Callie's home to make sure that everything was okay, and this is when he discovered the absolute worst. He discovered Callie's body. So then back at Victoria's property, this is when Victoria and Daniel drag the 2 young girls to a dirt pit. And this is when something even more horrifying is about to happen. And it absolutely breaks my heart what I am about to say, because it is believed that the younger of the 2 girls, the 4-year-old Erin, she would not stop crying. She was constantly screaming. She was screaming out for her mom. And Daniel could not get her to be quiet. And it was making him angry, and he wanted to do something about it. So this is when Daniel started attacking 4-year-old Erin, and heartbreakingly, this is when Daniel suffocated 4-year-old Erin. And I just can't believe that he did that. But it doesn't stop there. It gets even more horrific for JB, the 6-year-old, because after her sister, 4-year-old Erin, he just abandons the 2 girls in this dirt pit in the backyard. So JB is in this dirt pit with the body of her sister. Her sister has just been in front of her very eyes, and now she's in this dirt pit with her sister's body. But thankfully, things are not going to carry on for too much longer because the authorities are going to finally catch up to this monster. So the police turn up at the property later on that afternoon, almost 24 hours after they were kidnapped. And this is when they make the most horrific discovery. They found both girls in the dirt pit. Daniel and Victoria were immediately arrested at the scene, and the police were horrified what they found at this property with the dirt pit and the animal cages around it. They literally said, quote, "Based on the crime scene, what it looks like is this may be the place where there has been some human trafficking done." And I don't know anything more than that, but oh my God. And both Daniel and Victoria were taken into custody. And after being read his Miranda rights, Daniel waived all of his rights and made a full confession on live TV. And then all that was left to happen was the trial. But both Daniel and Victoria ended up pleading guilty. So all that was left was to sentence them. And their sentencing hearings took place not that long ago, at the end of 2025. Daniel was actually sentenced in multiple states. He was sentenced for his crimes in Louisiana, where he received 2 life sentences for. He also received another life sentence from the courts in Mississippi, as well as 2 more life sentences in federal court. So I think it's safe to say that Daniel Callahan is never being released from prison.